All right, Tim, question one is arguably the easiest and probably requires the most feedback. But tell me your franchise story. How did you fall into this industry that neither of us thought we would be in?
Yeah, hi, Nick. Look, this one was sort of an organic movement. So I was a young boxer, a young rugby player, and realised I didn't have the aptitude to be professional in either. They're not sports that you want to sort of prolong an amateur career if you're not going to do well in. And so moved into health science as a field, and from that naturally came into fitness. So I was a strength and conditioning coach who was being a personal trainer to pay for study. In the gym industry, as most people know, there's growth in two ways. There's growth through franchising and there's growth through company growth. Or direct company growth. So I was exposed to both through that sort of original couple of years in working in gyms. And I saw the opportunity for growth through franchising, where essentially, through a systemized approach to business, you could de-risk the execution, but you could let great technicians, if you like, run businesses in fields that they're passionate in. So I had some experience as a franchisee of a fitness business, a 24-hour gym. I liked that. I was successful in that process. So when it came to building a business and looking at those growth options, franchising was the one I chose. The ability to distill your experiences to de-risk the proposition for an incoming business operator just seemed like the right approach for me.
Did you ever think when you were younger, did you ever think you were going to fall into business? Was business the dream was to be a professional athlete, I assume?
Yeah. And failing that, a tradesman. So failing that, I wanted to be a cabinet maker, and so it was really a last minute decision to move into health, because I realized that health would give me the opportunity to stay engaged with sports and stay engaged with exercise as a long-term career. And that was sort of post high school. So post senior was when I made that decision. So no, I didn't think that I was going to be in fitness, although I did think I was going to be in business. I've got a family line that have been involved in business through my grandmother, and I used to be very interested in that business side. So I knew I was going to be in business, but I certainly didn't know what field.
So you open up Unit 1. Did you bootstrap it? Did you have to scrape together the money, or how did you get into this?
Yeah, it was that classic lean startup before lean startup existed as a trend. So essentially what I said to some investors, and they were people that I'd worked for in fitness, I said, I've got this idea. I think boxing has an opportunity to scale in a way that it hasn't scaled before. This is what I think I need to bootstrap the idea, and I'm going to fail fast in this. So I'm going to literally kill this concept in 6 months, and we'll never hear about it again. And everyone's right, boxing can't scale, or we're going to succeed. And it was one of those two options. And so investors signed up to that with full knowledge that I was planning to bootstrap and fail fast. And within 4 weeks we'd broken even in the concept store, and then within a year I had 15 applications from members of just 300 members, which was capacity, looking to purchase franchises.
Think back to that moment, or if you look back at it in retrospect, would you have told yourself to go find investors, or was that at that point in your life you needed that because you had to find the capital?
Yeah, that's exactly right. And that's the thing, I look back and I think, I got a few investors to support me, and I probably could have stretched to do that myself. Or I think, could I have stretched to do that myself? But the reality was I couldn't. And so, for me, it was an opportunity that they were willing to support me through a napkin business plan to do something which I actively told them I would look to fail fast in if it was going to. So It was fantastic. It was a very small amount of capital, an incredibly small amount of capital, but they supported me through that, and so I'm happy that they're involved.
What's interesting about your story, especially as I start thinking how it relates to franchise. I mean, you said you got to 300 members in the first year, right?
Yeah, correct. Capacity.
Right. And I would imagine, because you've now been through various franchisees, very rarely do they hit it at that pace, right?
Yeah.
Right. And so, like, I've used this term many times. They bet on the jockey, not on the horse. And so for you to walk in that room and say, I'm going to fail fast, that's the risk that you're putting in, or I'm going to figure this thing out. Like, it's almost like that mentality and the grit and hustle that you had is what they bought into the jockey. And so that it probably didn't matter even what the widget was. And you think now, as it relates back to qualifying franchisees, franchisors tend to bet on the horse. And so I want to see the franchisee come to the table. And if you maybe that's a question that needs to be asked in the sales process. How fast are you going to fail? Or, franchisee X comes to the table and goes, well, what's the average unit volume, or what's the worst case scenario? And you're like, shouldn't you be saying what's the top and how do I beat them? Like, there's a different approach. Like, what your story is hasn't crossed over into the way that we qualify franchisees.
No, it hasn't. And I think it's one of those quandaries, right, with franchising, because franchising is saying, we want a really entrepreneurial person to come in and grow this like a startup with, Stalin's guns behind you and no retreat attitude, but at the same time, franchising is providing a system and a framework with rigidity based on accumulated experience to de-risk and provide success. So you're asking for a mentality which is entrepreneurial, but then you're asking for an executor who doesn't want to change every single element of the business within the first 6 months. Those things don't always go together. So the balance is someone who is buying the franchise because they appreciate the evolution of the business and the refinement of the business, allows them to, and having that prepackaged allows them to aggressively grow and execute with excellence. So it is a fine line, and sometimes chasing an entrepreneurial franchisee is not helpful either. So depends on what elements of entrepreneurialism we're looking for.
Yeah, I don't know that many businesses have figured it out. I mean, there are that I can think of some that need to have more qualifications of the franchise buyer than the investment requires, and part of that equals the scale that franchisee goes into. When they open up door one, they don't stress about the dollars that they spend, or franchisor X says you need to spend 2% of your marketing, they go spend it. I was at a conference years ago. I've told this story many times, but at a conference, I'm sitting next to a franchisee in the audience. They have the top 3 franchisees from the system on stage. The third guy went from middle to bottom of the pack to number 3 over the course of 1 year. And it wasn't like it was like a scaling sales. It was like he had been in the system for a while and then it just turned it around. He said, what did you do? And he goes, I spent 10 cents of every dollar on marketing. And there's a franchisee sitting next to me and he elbows me in the side. He goes, that guy's an idiot. I'm like, he's on stage. He's number 3 in the system. Listen to what he just said. But it's like the mentality isn't like risk it all. It's like it's always calculated risk from the franchisee. And so your story, like, it's not about finding you, because when we find you, you go create a business. So you're an entrepreneur. But I've also said catch the entrepreneur before they catch you. It's like you want to catch someone that's on the cusp of doing this, that is you, where they're coming to you and saying, I need an investor. And it's interesting, like if you look at franchisees, very few of them come to the table and say, I've put together this investment group that's going to protect me in this model because I am the jockey. It's very rare. It's like franchisors like, how much money do you have and can you finance this thing?
Yep. Yeah, I agree. I think that growth mindset is that the New York franchisee. So our first American franchisee, stateside franchisee, has come from mid-tier management in fitness. So in the fitness sort of highly scaled company-owned clubs ecosystem, and has realized that, the skills that he brings, the hunger that he brings, would be better suited to a business that he owns himself. And so he's come in, and he's the guy that you're talking about. He's the guy that is that genuine, hungry young entrepreneur who's felt restricted by corporate fitness and has sort of got to a point where he could do it himself, or he could buy into the franchise system. And fortunately for us, and we think for him, he's chosen to come with us and take the grow fast model through franchising. But he's hungry, and he throws everything, including the kitchen sink, at his growth. He's active, he's involved, he's engaged. That's the kind of franchisee that you're always looking for in your profiling. And if we could get, 100 more US candidates like Jamie, who knows how far we could go in the US. You are going to get that mix though, aren't you? You're going to get the Jamies of the world, and you're also going to get those that take a more conservative approach. And it's finding out how to get them to look more aggressively at the top line, which is what you said before, not just focusing on the risks. How do we get over the risk hurdle, but how do we maximize this? How do we compete?
Well, I bet you and you can answer this if you have the answer. If you look at your DNA or Jamie's, there's probably some moment in life of rejection, pain, bullying, whatever it was, that is still the chip on the shoulder that never goes away. Like Michael Jordan being cut from his high school team is a chip on the shoulder. Tom Brady being drafted last in the draft was a chip on the shoulder. And when you find someone who has the chip, like, they don't see brick walls. They're like, screw that. I'm going right through it. And those are it doesn't have to be the highest. It doesn't have to be the Michael Jordans of the world. It could be a Jamie of the world who's going to find super success, or you. But I bet you everybody that finds that other degree of success is simply because there's a chip of someone that shit on them.
Yeah. Some driver, some motivator, something that drives them on that emotional level as well. I think that's true. It's certainly true for athletes, and finding that for franchisees is part of that investigation process, isn't it? If only, this myth about psychometric testing,
Right.
and the idea that, we're gonna create this through data. We're going to create this absolutely foolproof profile of the perfect customer. But everywhere you look, there's exceptions to the rule. And you can't, in that dating process, as much as the franchise investigation process is an opportunity for the franchisee to learn about the franchise and who's running it, it's also a very limited window for us to learn about what's motivating the franchisee. Everyone's selling. It's a dating scenario. I'm selling the franchise and the team, and they're selling themselves as operators. It is difficult to get to the intrinsic motivators, but maybe that's the thing that needs to work hand in glove with psychometric profiling.
Well, look, I mean, you would have been disqualified as a franchisee. You didn't have the capital, so you would have been rejected. Yet you got to 300 members as what would have been a rejected franchisee. You got to 300 in 1 year, and so that's where it's like sometimes, like, I think franchising disqualifies based on financial bandwidth, which I understand why it has to happen. But man, if you catch not many people can get to 300 in a year. Like, how do you say whether the brand of the future helps self-finance becomes the investors that backed you that said, we'll bet on you. How do we create that as a franchise brand for the next Tim that wants it, just doesn't have the capital?
Yeah, I love that idea. I think that in a way, you've got to prolong the dating period to make that work, right? Like, the investors, for me, I'd worked for them for 6 or 7 years. they were betting on the jockey, to use your analogy, because they'd seen me ride. So the dating period would need to be longer. There is sort of what, just listening to you talk made me think maybe it is the growth pathway for the great coaches and the great managers in a network. So maybe it's not a startup franchise opportunity. Yeah. Maybe it's a mature franchise opportunity that looks for those superstars within the managerial or operator level and looks to capitalize those to expand. Some friction with the franchisee if you're taking their lead staff members, but it is certainly an opportunity to catch the entrepreneur before they go out and do their own. So, and there's something to be said for it. I think that kind of model would be very attractive, because you've got a prolonged sort of dating period that you're observing an operator, and that would certainly help.
Let's switch gears. Tell me the vision for the business. What does the business look like? What success look like?
Yeah. So the mission was always to become the world's largest boxing community. And the way we're doing that is we're bringing more people to boxing than ever before. And so to sort of break that down, being the world's largest boxing community sounds like a really egocentric sort of mission, but we chose community intentionally because our way of getting there was to broaden the appeal of boxing, give people more access to boxing, because boxing's always been in two camps. It's always been your boxer size, or if you're old enough, your Tybo, Billy Blanks home videos, or it's been hardcore boxing gyms or people pretending to be hardcore boxing gyms that train fighters. And that spectrum hasn't been broken up successfully, that continuum. The way that we approached that was we looked at taking the intimidation out. When you come to UBX, you aren't preparing to be a fighter. You're getting access to the elite conditioning that a professional boxer would use without the expectation of getting in the ring. My first ever marketing was all the conditioning, none of the concussion. But I realized just even using that word concussion was negative in that original marketing. But that's where we sit, is how do we make boxing accessible using sports science, not bro science? So how do we make sports science the focus and the pillar of results, give access to people? Now, we think the market's huge for that. When you look at the strength program that we integrate into the boxing, which really sets us apart from other boxing providers, when you look at strength as an industry, they're 20 times larger. The largest is 20 times larger. So we see us tapping into the functional strength movement as it's a pillar of our product. We see us sort of challenging group fitness, exercise for the sake of exercise. We like to give people the opportunity to learn a skill and get fit while they're doing it. So we think that's a challenge that's somewhere we'll challenge the market, we'll disrupt the market. We think that convenience as a movement is something that is not only permeates all industries at the moment, but the convenience economy is real and it's not run its course yet. Everything's becoming more convenient. So our no start times model plays into that. So we think 1,500 clubs in the US and 1,500 clubs rest of the world is where we think that's sort of as far forward as we've looked. And we've got on paper over 515 contracted clubs. So we're 3.5 times larger than the largest boxing provider in history on paper. We just have to run this through and roll that out. So the future's bright. Boxing's a huge sport. Boxing's a huge exercise modality. We think there's infinite scale in it, and we just want to have the right product for the market.
1,500 sounds wonderful. In today's private equity world, do you last that long? I mean, you're now a business guy.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're already getting the checks waved in your face now. Do you ride it out all the way, or do you bring on equity partners, more additional equity partners along the way, knowing that a lower percentage of a much larger company could still equal a lot more wealth to you and your family.
Yeah, it's an incredibly good story and or good question, and the story is that we put that original capital in, which only just barely covered the fit out of the first club. From that point, we've grown organically on profit alone. So as a founding group, we've never raised capital. What we've realized now is we've come through the proof of concept, and we've expanded and proved the concept now in 7 markets, including Japan and the US, that have opened in the last 6 weeks. And we now think that we're ready to hit the gas. We're ready to accelerate, and to do that, we need growth capital. And we have a serious tech roadmap. We'd be considered a fit tech business at core. And we have a roadmap for that tech to integrate some of the newest technology. We've got great partnerships with the likes of Google and Asus and Adidas to help fuel that sort of growth. And I think the capital will go towards the next evolution of UBX as a business model, but also the next stage of growth, a growth that is capital fueled, that we've never actually had before, you know. And I think that's where the real excitement is the proof of concept's done now, and let's scale. Let's go to the market. Let's scale. Let's see it reach its potential.
Well, look, I think you're taking the right approach. I mean, there are many companies that have expanded internationally and struggled to get into the United States. The fact that Unit One is in New York is a great win for you, and even your growth strategy of how you're going to continue to expand within the United States, I think, is smart. You just the mindset. It still goes back to probably day one. Like, you can, even though you've had success, that grit and hustle never leaves. Like, it's always in you. Like, you're always bootstrapping. And I think as most entrepreneurs, and I think this will probably relate to you. Like, I think about my own business, it's not necessarily about cash anymore. It's more about the game. And so it's like, I like the competition. I like the puzzle piece. I like trying to constantly figure things out. I know that money is there, but it's like the mind twists at some point where it's more about winning the game. And that's where, when you're coming out and saying we're going to be the number one largest brand in the space, we're going to redefine this thing. That's winning the game. So, you know, I think you're on a great path, and clearly paid clear attention to branding and the power of the brand. Just the fact that, just said, we're really a technology company. We'll get great valuations when you go to exit too. But, you know, I think you're doing a lot of right things. Anything else you want the ghost candidate that's watching this to know about the business?
Well, I think that there's authenticity in that my co-founder is a 4-time world champion boxer. He's authentically interested in giving people access to boxing as a exercise modality. My background wasn't successful in sport, but business is where I play the game, to your point. And so I think you're right. No matter what growth we achieve, my focus will be, and the team's focus is on pursuit of excellence in the business model, because that's the game of franchising. That's the game of scale. You know, the game of scale is results for franchisees, because that self-perpetuates the business model. Authentically, I still own a club. Our head office is directly above the original club. You know, I still go down there and train. I still cover a lunch shift occasionally to sit there, to understand the business at every level. And so, you know, those franchise candidates, those ghost candidates out there, as you put it, can be sort of really confident that the team operating are operators themselves. The background is authentic. The tech forward approach is something that will see us continue to evolve and make sure that we stay ahead of the tech game. We've got integrations with AI that are coming out. You know, some really innovative ways to do business, some ways that will break the business model and evolve the product. And so for us, it really is about just finding those candidates that buy into that story, buy into doing something that hasn't been done before, but also buy into pushing the barriers with how a business can evolve and what is the next generation of fitness franchising look like. And if they buy into that aspect and come along with the journey, then they should apply. If not, don't. I can recommend other franchises for you to join.
I love it, Tim. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing where the story continues to climb. Clearly, you got a big vision. We'll be watching. So for Tim, I'm Nick. This is another episode of Meet the Zor.
Thank you.